Acquired brain injury refers to brain damage arising from a traumatic event or cerebral hemorrhage. Brain injuries in which there is a loss of consciousness of more than 24 hours are defined as serious and obtain a score equal to or less than 8 points in a coma measuring instrument called the Glasgow Coma Scale. Cranial-encephalic trauma, for example, is the result of a direct hit or a force applied to the head that is so strong as to cause brain damage. What happens in a car accident, for example, is that the brain, projected at a certain speed and acceleration, undergoes a sudden stop and therefore sudden deceleration, with a consequent injuries caused by the internal impact of the brain against the cranium. Naturally, the higher the speed at which the impact occurs, the greater the brain damage will be. Coma is a state of unconsciousness that manifests itself with the inability to have contact with the environment and the impossibility of obtaining voluntary reactions from the patient. The seriousness of a coma is measured by the Glasgow Coma Scale, the scale that is used to evaluate the severity of the coma during the period of intensive care, and then we have levels of cognitive functioning, the scale in which, on the basis of observation of a very large number of people who have been in a coma, 8 levels have been identified that normally characterize the path that a person pursues from the moment he or she enters in a coma up to the phase of complete recovery of consciousness. Imagine that suddenly everybody around you starts talking in a language you don't know. You are not able to understand what they are saying, and you can't make them understand what you are saying. You are scared, you don't know what to do, and you realize that you are in hospital. Unknown people approach you. They speak, but you are neither able to ask or understand what they are saying. Gradually, you realize that it is not the world, but it's you that has changed. You don't know it, but you have become aphasic. From that moment on, along a field road before starting to speak again awaits you. The aphasic person is affected by the consequences of brain damage, usually located in the left hemisphere of the brain. The most serious clinical forms are global aphasia. With this type of aphasia, speech is not fluent, words are suppressed, and the comprehension of language is also compromised. This type of aphasia occurs in the first period after a brain injury. Broca's aphasia, writing, reading, and simple spontaneous language are seriously compromised. Speech is almost telegraphic, and the few sentences are often devoid of complete meaning and lacking articles, prepositions, and adverbs. Wernicke aphasia. Damage in the Wernicke region generates disorder in language production and comprehension. In fact, the patients elaborate a particular linguistic code, sometimes incomprehensible. Anomic aphasia. This is a particular type of fluent aphasia that is characterized by the patient's inability to find the exact terms to express himself or complete the sentence. The sensation reported by the patient is like always having the word on the tip of the tongue. A recent study based on the qualitative research methodology has analyzed the question of how people create the sense of self after a serious brain injury. Following a brain injury, people construct the sense of their self based on the meanings they attribute to their lived experiences and through social and practical activities. The main manifestation of self-disorders occurs in the communication sphere. During a communication exchange, people normally integrate linguistic and extralinguistic acts with appropriate paralinguistic aspects. People who live in an environment that lacks stimulation and social contact gradually become isolated and depressed. The paralinguistic component par excellence is the prosodic system, consisting of vocal parameters such as intonation and timbre, and temporal ones including rhythm of speech, articulation, and pauses. The prosodic function, moreover, is distinguished in intrinsic prosody, which relates to the intonation profile, intellectual prosody, which concerns the non-literal meanings of communication, and emotional prosody, which allows us to decode emotions like happiness, anger, and sadness. Communication is therefore a complex cognitive process based on the integration of various cognitive functions and an intricate network of neural circuits. The next step will be to reorganize the patient's brain function so it has a certain linguistic competence. Here two linguists come into play, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Ward. Their hypothesis, which has taken the name of linguistic relativity, affirms that the language people speak influences their cognitive development. In its most extreme form, this hypothesis states that the way they express themselves determines their way of thinking. In this regard, some collaborators of the French National Center for Scientific Research, through magnetic resonance, examined some mother tongue subjects who had acquired a good school knowledge of English after the age of 7. The result was that in all subjects, listening to a story in the mother tongue induced a strong activation of the left hemisphere and a certain activation of the right hemisphere. Instead, listening to a story in English elicited very different responses in several subjects, in some of whom only the activation of the right hemisphere was observed.